welcome, ladies and gentlemen. First, let me express my heartfelt thanks for both the World Food Prize Foundation as well as CIMMYT for organizing this panel that focuses on climate resilience. The topic of this panel is, this panel will discuss the impact of climate change on farmers in the global south, but more importantly on some of the solutions that are being worked in partnership. So today we have the privilege of hearing from three remarkable women who have achieved great success in their respective fields. I will introduce them shortly. So just as a bit of a background, and many speakers before me have spoken on climate change today, as we all know that human-caused climate change is impacting all aspects of our lives. As the recent IPCC report, of which I was one of the authors, has clearly noted that climate change has led to, currently we are 1.2 degrees above pre-industrial levels. Not only this, but this morning Dr. Callie Fowler rightly pointed out that the last 12 months were actually breached the 1.5 degree mark that has been something that all the countries have agreed as a part of Paris Agreement. It doesn't mean that we have overall breached the 1.5 degree yet, but in the last 5 months have shown that level having been breached with serious consequences. So let's pause and reflect on that for a moment. Settled agriculture, as we know, started some 10,000 years ago, and the temperatures have never been as high as they are now, which means that our farmers today are cultivating at temperatures and at a climate that is completely unprecedented in the entire human history of agriculture. This is indeed very, very serious. So we have a panel that will today discuss climate change adaptation and resilience building strategies, and we will share some successful initiatives and partnerships that are actually making some impact on the ground. Before I introduce our three illustrious speakers, just a little bit of introduction for myself and the reason I'm here. So my own journey with the World Food Prize Foundation started in 2012 when I was the inaugural winner of the Norman Borlaug Field Award. That was way back in 2012. And the reason for that was some of the research that I, as a CG scientist at that time, had done had led to electrification. 200,000 farmers in my home state of West Bengal got electricity connection as a result of that particular piece of research that led to almost 30 to 50% reduction in cost of irrigation. Since then, I have been increasingly working in the field of climate change, been contributing to the IPCC report, and more recently, just the speaker before me was talking about the planetary boundaries. So there is now a new round of the planetary boundary calculations are happening right now as a part of Earth Commission, and that actually, interestingly, not only focuses on the physical boundaries, the safe boundaries, but also, more importantly, the just boundaries. And that's some of the work that I've been doing and leading the climate platform at the CG. And the just boundaries are extremely important from climate because we know that the impacts of climate change are very unequal. Those who have emitted the least, some of our smallholder farmers from the global south, are facing the impact the most, hence the importance of just boundaries. So with that little introduction, let me now move on to my speakers. I have three amazing speakers today. My first speaker today is Dr. Swati Nayak, who is the 2023 Borlaug Field Award recipient, and she's a scientist at the International Rice Research Institute. And Swati also leads she has a global leadership position where she leads the CGIAR initiative on seed equal under Genetic Innovation Science Group of the 1CG. Welcome, Swati, and lovely to have you here today. Our second speaker today is Dr. Alice Ruhweza. She is the Senior Director for Policy Influence and Engagement at the WWF International, and she's also an esteemed board member of CIMMYT. And Alice, as many of you know, is a global thought leader on a number of issues, including climate change and nature. So welcome, Alice. Lovely to have you here.
Thank you.
Our last but not least speaker is Vaughan. She's the Deputy Assistant Administrator for USAID's Bureau of Resilience, Environment and Food Security, where she advances Feed the Future Global Hunger Initiative. Welcome. Welcome, Anne. The way we will do it is we'll kind of, have a free-flowing conversation. Feel free to interrupt each other and, if you have anything to add. But first, let me start with Swati. Swati, you work with farmers, largely in South Asia, but also elsewhere, and you are just aware how much those impacts of climate change are coming up in the recent years. Can you give us some specific examples of how farmers are getting affected in South Asia, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me refer to one of very insightful article which you wrote, Aditi, this year, when India was facing serious heat waves and El Nino effect. And you defined or you described how the Western disturbance has been reduced in the glaciers. And we saw some strange phenomenon of snowless Kashmir in the month of January, when the valley is completely snow-clad in the month of November. That affected the agriculture and 70% of the livelihood of the state significantly, especially in the vegetable or orchard farming or whatever they were dependent upon. Same applies to a lot of food grains. And a lot of data we handle every day in our research already has indicated that with every 2.5 to 5 degrees Celsius increase in temperature, wheat and rice productivity decreases significantly. Like, in wheat we can see up to 40 to 50% reduction in yield, and in rice 30 to 40%. And we know another major food grain like maize is quite sensitive to moisture and heat. So in this context, it's just not only threatening the livelihood and food security, but also do not forget that climate has an impact on also the grain quality and the nutrition composition of the grains which we eat. Exactly. And a lot of studies shows that the zinc, iron, protein contents of the same grains, same varieties are probably not same that what it used to be years back or decades back. Not that good varieties are not being bred, but the climatic situations, the aberrations, that leads to also, reduction in the nutrient composition significantly also. So that hidden hunger also sweeps in. And not to mention that we all know that the climate change challenges can make the rural households more vulnerable, even affect the urban consumers who are dependent on foods and beverage, because 40% of our inflation is weighted upon the food and beverage prices. Right. And in this context, it's a problem for all of us. It's a common problem. But at the same time, it can also perpetuate a lot of gender inequalities in household and the community level, where we know that women and other vulnerable segments of the society are affected significantly by the climate stress. Right. So these are some of the direct implications which we see every day in field while working with the farmers, households, and all the stakeholders in the agriculture value chain.
Right. So the impacts are not only on quantity, but also on quality, not only on the producers, but also on the consumers. So it's a whole value chain. Now let me come to you, Anne. So can you share, so we all know the impacts. I think that's something that's very well established. But can you therefore share with us some examples of programs, policies, innovations, or even partnerships that are working with farmers to strengthen farmers' resilience?
Sure, no, and thanks so much. And I think I might talk a little bit about sub-Saharan Africa right now, as we look at some of the impacts of an El Nino, where climate change has made El Nino much worse. Farmers are losing 90% of their crops. In some places, maize has been really decimated, which is a staple crop in the region. We're really proud under Feed the Future initiative, which is U.S. government, a whole of government effort to help address poverty and hunger, and have been able to use that as a platform, and working with, as Special Envoy Fowler noted earlier, AID, Accelerating Innovation Delivery Initiative, and working in sub-Saharan Africa and parts of the Great Lake region, closely partner with CIMMYT and 59 other partners, half of which are private sector partners, a lot of NGOs, to help make sure we're accelerating smart innovations so that farmers are getting access. So even in the face of pretty horrific drought, they're still able to produce food for themselves and their families. And what that looks like is making sure we have the right science, the right seeds, the right private sector partners who are pulling and creating a demand for these types of seeds, diversifying, so you're not just growing maize, but you're growing cowpea and other things that are more resilient to climate change, the right type of practices so that you're mixing and intercropping, having less till. And really importantly, and a shout out to the 1 Acre Fund did a great job making sure we had climate information services for farmers. So farmers knew when to plant early enough or at the right time, so that all of those puzzle pieces and all of those different pieces came together so that 2.5 million farmers were benefiting from these different innovations. And we're seeing the impact and ability of farmers to feed themselves. That's, I think, one really good example of taking Dr. Borlaug's part of, what can you do? How do we get research out to people? And I wanted to dig into another, 2 more quick examples. One in Malawi, in our Feed the Future program we call with Growth Poles. We've partnered with Feed the Future Peanut Innovation Lab out of Georgia that works really closely with private sector partners and farmers in Malawi to make sure we're having better climate smart peanuts that are more nutritious, or called groundnuts in the region, but are more nutritious food. Farmers are increasing their income, and because we are working with the private sector, there's hundreds of thousands of farmers who are now producing more with better quality seeds thanks to that partnership, and are increasing their incomes. And then with the husks of the shells of peanuts, they're turning those into energy briskets, because right now 89% of Malawi doesn't have access to electricity, but using those briskets, you can use that to fuel, instead of chopping down trees, which is a real problem of deforestation in the region. So you're using every part of the nut to really solve a lot of problems. And then last but not least, as we speak of science and using the right type of technology, Feed the Future has been really proud to work on something called Space to Place. So space is literal space, is how do we take space satellite technology and get the right type of soil maps, and then importantly combining it with local indigenous knowledge. And we did this in partnership in Ethiopia with Ethiopian farmers and the government, and helped reach 4.2 million farmers to make sure that they know, as we've been talking so much about soil today, if you don't get soil right, what the soil needs are, so you can get the right amount of fertilizer into that soil and increase your productivity, and are now helping to expand that into other countries. And so I think those are good examples of, we're facing some tough challenges, but with science, technology, and then really important, how do we get it to the farmers and make that sustainable, and that there's a pull and there's incentives for people to use these different products and the technologies, you can have a real game-changing opportunity. Thanks.
Oh, those examples are fascinating. Indeed, the examples of take it to the farmers and use science. So excellent, yeah. With that, Alice, if I may come to you, I wanted you, if you can talk a little bit about solutions that tackle environment and climate together.
Thank you very much. As you know, at the Worldwide Fund for Nature, we work in places, and in the places where we work, they're the places that are the most important for wildlife. So when you think of southern Kenya, northern Tanzania, that's where you have the world's largest migration. Everybody knows about the Masai Mara. Or when you talk about the Kavango-Zambezi Transfrontier, because that's where you have the largest assemblage of elephants. But these places are also important for farmers. They're also important for food security. And therefore, our work is about coexistence. How do you make sure that your goals for wildlife conservation coexist with food security? And we do this in 4 ways. First, we make sure that we do land use planning. Proper land use planning, working with the farmers so that we can set aside corridors for wildlife, but also have places where we can grow food. We also make sure that the policies and enabling institutions are there to enable that coexistence. But we also must have value chains, because if we don't have sustainable value chains, the farmers, they will not find it useful for them. So we must have, they must be sustainable, and they must bring livelihoods to the people. And we also deal with food loss and waste in terms of dealing with post-harvest loss. So place-based work, coexistence in those areas, but through land use planning, value chains, policy institutions, and food loss and waste.
Okay, if we have time, maybe we'll come back to the food loss and waste, because that literally, if it were a country, it would be the 3rd largest source of greenhouse gas emissions. So depending on time, maybe I'll come back to you. Would you like to talk of some of the CG-generated solutions around resilient practices, climate resilient practices that you might be working with?
Yeah, Aditi, I think in CG space, there has been significant advancement in terms of technological solutions and also the processes and practices to adapt to climate change or mitigate the effects. And if I could give some examples of, like, in the morning we're talking about heat-tolerant wheat varieties. Right. We know that, the sub-1, the submergence-tolerant rice varieties, and a lot of, strategies which is around water resource conservation and irrigation modeling to work towards reducing carbon footprints and methane emission are some of the remarkable work that has been going on. While individual technologies have a great role to play, in adaptation and mitigation aspect, but what probably we need to think towards futuristically is the bundled solution, which we can offer to different stakeholders. Because nothing can work in isolation. Even the technology cannot, be adopted in scale to show the impact if it is served just as a standalone technology. It requires the enabling policy, it requires the service infrastructure, it requires the ecosystem that would need a bundled solution to be forwarded to the systematically to different stakeholders. And this is something as a stakeholder base we should be looking forward to in future to provide that option, which is not that simple as it appears to be.
Yes, I think the point you make about not just one solution, but a whole suite of solutions that works in tandem is very important. And actually, some of the recent IPCC assessments also show that when solutions work together, the effectiveness of those solutions in reducing, climate risk is the largest, something that also Anne mentioned with her numerous examples. So looks like we do have a little bit of time before we come to our final question. So maybe, Alice, I can move on to you to talk a little bit more about some of the initiatives WWF takes in terms of food loss and waste. Oh. Do you focus on the loss part of it or the waste part of it or both of it?
Well, both. I mean, the post-harvest loss. And so when we work with farmers and we make sure that they have sustainable value chains across the corridor, we also make sure that whatever they produce is able to get to market and they're able to get the right price for it. And we also deal with the issues to do with waste. Can I add something?
Yes, for sure.
I wanted to talk about, I wanted to comment on the point that you're making about solutions. And I think one of the biggest research projects we've been doing in WWF has been around what we call solving the great food puzzle.
Right.
And really it's about realizing that different countries have different contexts and require different solutions. And the solutions can only be done at that level. And we've really been looking at the right interventions at the right place at the right time, and really looking from a holistic perspective. And we found that beyond natural resource management, which is what we focus on, we also need to tackle education. We need to look at infrastructure. We need to look at finance and trade. And we need to look at science and technology, of course. So I really wanted to comment on the no one size fits all.
Right.
Can I jump in too a little bit on the food loss and waste side? Is that so half of vegetables are lost before they get to market. So it's it's a methane, but that's vegetables nutrition that is not getting into families and to children who really need it. When we look at there's 720 million hungry people around the world. So I think thinking through the whole food systems and everything that Alice just said, where can we have these efficiencies to make sure that we have a through line of when we from production to bellies, that there is a logicalness and that we're attacking problems. If it's transportation, if it's the infrastructure, or if it's cold storage, where can we get specific along these value chains to make sure that we're getting, especially nutritious food that is so important to market and then to families.
Yes. So climate solutions, for them to work, they're also not about mitigating or adapting. They have to actually work for various perspectives, nutrition, gender empowerment. So it has to be really a multifaceted aspect. I think that is very, very clear from the literature and from the practice that we do. As always, we never have enough time, so that kind of brings me to my last question, and each one of you can take up to 1.5 to 2 minutes for this. Given the theme of DialogueNEXT, what advice do you have to strengthen and nurture farmer resilience? Basically, in other words, what is your call for action for the audience today? And among the audience, we have very many farmers representatives. So what can all of us take back from this panel? Yes, so maybe we can start with Alice, Swati, and then Anne in that order.
Okay. Well, our farmers, at least our farmers in Africa, we face three big decisions: right? What we farm, how we farm, and where we farm. Those are going to be very important decisions. And like I said earlier, there's no one size fits all.
Right.
We're working in different contexts, in different landscapes, and we have to be responsive. So for me, we need the right interventions at the right place and at the right time, but we must have a holistic approach towards it. Beyond just solving for climate, we need education, we need infrastructure, we need finance and trade, we need everything working together. And we need social justice, equity, and empowerment.
Nice.
Thank you.
Excellent. Swati?
Yeah, I think as the problem remains very big and complex, what we need a robust public, private, and community partnership. And this partnership need to create, a community of best practices or action on ground, which is delivered and shown in scale through evidence. And this with a common vision and goal, this partnership needs to be fostered with target mode approach. And at the same time, it is also important to prioritize, incentivize climate adaptation and mitigation strategies and intervention in each and every program design or strategy we make.
Right.
On paper or in action or in our thought processes overall. So it is something which is non-negotiable, and we are just, donor agencies, CGIAR agencies, all policymakers together, we need to make that, a comprehensive prioritization and incentivization in our program formulations. And before we expect farmers to take the, the whole burden of something which they didn't cause.
Yes.
And so let's share this burden together and work in a partnership mode.
Yes. Something you say is actually very resonates. I used to work in Bhutan, and one of the things that they do is any policy that they have, at the end of it, they actually scan that policy through the lens of what they call gross national happiness. So every policy must meet those criteria of gross national happiness. And that had led me to think in recent years, why can't our policies actually be also scanned to see if they're delivering on adaptation and mitigation goals?
Some metrics.
Yes, exactly.
We can design some.
Yeah.
People.
Yes.
Anne.
All right.
The last
First,
word is yours.
Well, first, thanks. It is lovely to be on an all-woman panel. So I have two calls to action. That's yes. One's on finance, and I'll end with gender so we can go full scope. So first, finance. It is unjust, we're speaking of justice, that farmers have to pay 40% interest to get inputs. The finance market is often broken for smallholder farmers. We need to fix that. So my call to action to all of us is let's think about how we can do that and be proactive. We need to think specifically about addressing what those smallholder farmer needs are. Wanted to talk about two ways USAID is working to try to address this. The first one, and would love folks to join us in these efforts. The first one is something we're doing specifically focused on Africa called FASA, Financing Agro Small and Medium Enterprises in Africa. So FASA, I've got a lot of acronyms for you, but this one I think we're pretty excited about. We've partnered with Norway, and we'll be announcing a fund manager later this year. But this fund is it's a fund of fund in its first loss to try to get and drive more finance into the agricultural SME market, which is the backbone of how we do ag in Africa and frankly around the world. If we can make it easier for smallholder farmers to access more funds, we're screening our investments for gender and climate considerations. So let's get more sort of fund liquidity into the systems that smallholder farmers really need. So happy to share more information and would love to partner with other donors to contribute to this FASA fund. And with more information, happy to chat about that. Second, and very briefly, we've talked a lot about nature, and I really like how Alice has framed the importance of investing in nature. Again, apologies for the acronym, but if you're interested from our private sector partners in thinking about how you can invest in nature-based solutions for agriculture, please Google the Climate Finance Development Accelerator. Join that network, and today we're posting some information about how to partner and partnerships we're looking for, and great ideas from the private sector about how we can crowd in and invest more in innovative financial models to help nature-based solutions for agriculture. So that's my call to action on finance. Let's talk about gender. If you don't know yet, very exciting, 2026, according to UN resolution just passed a month or two ago, 2026 will be the International Year of the Woman Farmer. Yay, this is great.
That's
Everyone
good.
get excited.
Yeah.
Yay, right?
Yes, UN years of
Yes. So let's make sure that this year is not just a year that's something on paper and then you check the boxes and you flip the calendar and nothing has changed. So there's a couple things that we can do differently. A, be intentional. We always say that, be intentional, but how are we going to be intentional about making sure we put women at the heart, smallholder farmers at the heart of what we're working on? I would say first, through Feed the Future and USAID's investments, we've set a commitment, our administrator set a commitment a year ago that says 1 out of every $4 of Feed the Future funds that USAID works on is really going to be intentional about women and food systems. So as a donor, and calling all their donor friends in the crowd, how do we set these targets for ourselves to be specific about making sure we're targeting women to have an impact on women in food security and helping smallholder farmers? So that's great, right? More money for women, great. Well, let's also care about the outcomes and the impacts of those dollars. So we've also set a target for ourselves. This is going to get a bit wonky, but it's important. So we work and track our numbers really carefully on how we're investing our money. We're proud that from, I think it's FY 2018 to 2022, we helped mobilize $1 billion in ag finance for women and women-owned enterprises. We think that's pretty good. But then you dig into the numbers, which means you have to collect aggregated data. But dig into those numbers, and we found that while we're getting more women finance, guess how much every cent on the dollar compared to a man to a woman? Women are only getting about 47 cents on the dollar to men. Well, we don't like that. We want to change that. So we've set a target for ourselves that by 2030, we're going to have parity in the amount of finance that men and women have in ag finance. So it's a tough target we're excited to work on. We wanted to call on others, especially we've got this great, exciting 2026 Year of Women coming up. What else can we do to make sure that there's parity in finance, there's parity in access to all the technologies that we're talking about, so we can see a real demonstrable difference in the lives of female farmers who we know are carrying an immense load when it comes to feeding the world, especially in the face of climate change, as climate change has more impact on women, especially women farmers. So I hope that gets you excited as some calls to action and stuff to do when you walk out of here so we can make sure we can have a difference. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
fun.
That was fantastic, Anne. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of our panel, and I hope all of you enjoyed this as much as obviously the 4 of us did. And thank you again, World Food Prize Foundation and CIMMYT, for this opportunity to create a good precedence of an all-star woman panel, if I may say so. So it's not often that we have this, so amazing. Thank you so much, and thank you all.